Welcome to one of my first reviews, if not my first, on the MRQ Productions channel. Today we're going to be looking at a camera I've had for 2 years. 2 years with the Lumix S5IIX. Now, this thing is just insane. I feel like it went under the radar, as do most Lumix cameras. I mean, the S1 Mark II now is kind of really solidified its place. Talk to people that have said yeah, I would use it over the FX3. Now, I use an FX3. I've used it. I've used an FX30. I've used all types of Sony cameras, by merit of charity and mosque that I do work for. There's no doubt about it. The FX3 is that's why everyone's trying to compete with it, and it is a 5-year-old camera, correct? But these other brands that have different color sciences, you know, some people like those looks more. That's why, you have the Canon C50 now, which is, for what it is, pretty sick. You have the Nikon ZR in collaboration with Red. And, for what they are, they're all amazing. Every camera is good now. But this thing, for the time that it came out at, was absolutely insane. Has all the bells and whistles. Yeah, your 4K is cropped in a little bit. But, I mean, you have 6K open gate at 30 frames per second. This lens isn't meant for full frame, but because my camera shoots 4K and cinematic 4K in APS-C, I can shoot on this lens, and it has AF, and it works. I think as much as I would love to tell you guys the specs and the rundown of this camera and everything that it does, I want this to be more of a video of everything I like experience-wise. After 2 years of using it for work, for business, for making content, what I truly love about using this camera and why it's my daily rig. Now, firstly, just how robust it is. It has this massive grip to it where the battery goes, and this grip is just so nice in the hand. I recently met someone who had a ZR, and they let me hold it, and it just doesn't have that grippable hand grip. It feels like you need something like a side grip to make it work, and that's just not something just adds weight to the whole point of the ZR, which is to be a lightweight full frame camera, right? But it just doesn't have enough to grip. It feels like you gotta hold it by the lens, whereas this camera you can just hold it straight up. That's one of the only main things for handheld. The IBIS in this camera is second to none. Lumix, I think, just is above the game in terms of IBIS. And the way it stabilizes, when I'm using DaVinci afterwards, is just butter. Now, the IBIS paired with an RS3 Pro gimbal or any of the DJI gimbals, it gets a little wonky when you're trying to stabilize afterwards. So definitely turn it off when you're using it with a gimbal. With a gimbal, I would say this thing has been amazing. I mean, I have a half cage on it, and I do also have a full cage, but I can mount this vertically, and then vertically it balances well. I shoot 6K open gate vertically, and it's just amazing, right? Amazing. And people are like, oh, but you can't speed ramp. No, you can speed ramp at 30 frames per second, because you just speed it up, and then when you slow it back down to 30 frames per second, the 30 frames per second feels like slow-mo if you know how you're recording, if you know what you're doing with the gimbal. What can I say? I mean, the first thing I did when I bought this camera was I worked a little bit with it, got used to it, and then I took it and shot a documentary with it. I put it into this, I built out a cine rig. It's a full cage handle. V-mount goes on the back. I had a dummy battery that plugged into the V-mount to charge it. I shot the dock for 14 days. Rarely had to charge my batteries, even though, as videographers, we're the type of people that, we plug all our stuff in the night of, wake up in the morning, unplug everything, so. But in terms of that, that was a really cool experience because I was in the Middle East shooting that documentary, and it is mad hot there. We're talking 50 degrees Celsius. That's not Fahrenheit, it's Celsius. And there's a feature about this camera that most cameras struggle with. Well, now every single camera has it, but this camera had at the time that really sold me on buying it, and it's the fact that it has an internal fan, has internal cooling. It has vents by the EVF, I think the biggest thing that sold me on this camera, bar the internal cooling, was the fact that it has SSD recording. Like, that's just something like a brand like Sony will not allow you to have. Unless I stand corrected and the FX3 II comes out and they do something crazy. But I mean, like the FX6, the FX9 that really nobody buys. Um, Buranos, Venices, whatever, they don't allow you to record to SSDs. Now, those bigger cameras, obviously, you're not going to record to SSDs. But I'm just saying, in general, like the FX3, if it could record to SSDs, like it would be the pound for pound undisputed go to cameras. Because simply like the FX3 with the low light it has and all those capabilities, recording to an SSD, you'd save so much money on storage. But in turn, you have to spend all that money on tough cards, which are really expensive. At the time I bought this camera in 2024 of May or April, and SSD drives like the AI wave had not begun. Like it was starting, but it had not begun or become what it is today. SSD drives were still $150 for a 2 terabyte card. Now 2 terabytes is like 400, 350, right? It's a bit different, but back then it was the viable solution, right? It's like you didn't want to spend money on memory cards, and since I had so many expenses, buying my first camera, buying a lens like 24 to 70 Sigma f2.8, like, as a purchase, as your first lens with this camera, this is a big you're spending like upwards of like 5K. And that's not USD, but like starting out when you're working like a different job, knowing the expenses that you have and then breaking it down, especially like when you have to build out a rig. Like this stuff is not cheap. Like this metal and these carbon rods that everybody thinks is like, oh, look at those little accessories. Yeah, each piece costs like $100. You know what I mean? That stuff adds up fast. Like you want a handle, $80, $60. You want carbon rods, $50. You want the V-mount clamp, that's like another $40, $50. And it's like you're going with the cheapest brands here. You're going with newer, small rig. You start going up to the bigger brands, like you're spending $200 an item, an accessory. So really, like the solution that made sense at the time, given all these costs and how I needed to get all these things in order before going out to shoot this doc, it made sense to go with this camera. And to this day, I'm so pleased with it. And I would say this camera was like the videography upgrade of the Lumix S5 line or S5 Mark II line. So with this one, you got the all black with the red record button decal, but this camera was essentially made for videography. Like it's more videography centric. And being that it is, I would say, the closest comparison to an FX30 at its price point, being cheaper than an FX30, I think it was a no-brainer. But I think it punches like way above its weight class, especially for the time it came out at. Everyone's raving about OpenGate. OpenGate, oh my god, 6K OpenGate, 8K OpenGate, the C50, the Nikon ZR. But this thing had it like 4 years ago when it came out. You know what I mean? It just went under the radar because everybody was still caught up on the FX3 being at the top of the hill, and now people are like, oh, there's competitors and whatnot. But I believe this camera, the S5 Mark IIX, just punched way above its weight class. Now they say like every camera on the market is good now. It's just like who uses it. That's true to a certain degree, but I also believe some cameras, they have some usability specs about them that just make them better. One of the other things I looked at before buying this camera was how good of a company is Lumix. I think people overlook a part of selecting a camera brand because, like we said, all camera brands make amazing cameras now. They all, for the most part, use the same sensors even, right? They buy the sensors from the same manufacturer, blah, blah, blah. It's just the chips inside, the processing power, how they decode the image, blah, 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 blah. I don't need to speak about the specs because there's a million videos from when this camera came out till today of people talking about specs, dynamic range, the dual base ISOs, everything, everything. But I think when picking a brand, it's important to see how user-friendly is that brand. At the end of the day, you're buying a camera from a company and you're investing a lot of money into it. So the least that you could hope for is that the company does a good job in reaching out to its customers with firmware updates, software updates, etc., etc., etc. Now, let me give you an example. Sony came out with a app that allows you to control. It's called like the multi-control Sony Creators app or something along those lines. You can control the cameras via Bluetooth, via Wi-Fi connection, and it's live feed monitoring, control all the settings, change the settings, focus, blah, 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 etc. Lumix users were like, whoa, this is so cool. Imagine we had an app where we could do that as well and just, tether to the cameras and then be able to control the cameras. Lumix within like 4 months, which is absurd timing if you think about it, like 4 months for the newer cameras, and then within a month and a half of that update, they released it for all the other cameras. Insane response time from Lumix. And it's things like that that, shows you that Lumix cares about its users, cares about the experience, rather than, we're just selling you a product and making money off of you. There's things like, if you take photos with these cameras, you can connect via USB-C to tether straight to a MacBook, straight to a laptop. You download their software for the tethering, and it literally works like any other tethering system for photos. You're in a live studio taking pictures, you have to show those pictures to clients, click the picture, goes straight to your laptop, you show it to the client. You don't have to go out and buy that orange tether cable, that tethering cable. You can use a USB-C cable, connect straight to the camera and do it. So it's like things like that just makes this camera so accessible. Everyone likes to say, well, no, I don't need OpenGate. Well, yeah, I don't need the FX3's low light capabilities either. But I do in certain circumstances, right? That's the point. It's better to have it than not to have it. So with OpenGate, it's one of those things where it's like, I'm punching in regardless, but being able to punch in that much more while I'm shooting a reel, or, just shooting wide and then being able to zoom in and the quality's still there, it's a no-brainer, right? It's a no-brainer. But then you'll say, what about low light? You didn't speak about low light. The low light is not an FX3. We know that, right? No camera at the time was close. It was the FX3 and then everybody else. So like, for what it is, the low light wasn't terrible. Like those sunset times where you see that like the camera struggles a bit, where it's not completely dark outside, but it's also not bright enough, or there isn't enough like daylight. But during controlled settings where you have lights and everything, the camera performs to a T. It is so clear, and I've had people who run Sony tell me, wow, the color science, like the colors of people's faces, the colors of everything just look so much nicer off a Lumix than it does off a Sony, and that's because Sonys have that tint of green to them. Now, this is not a comparison to Sony. We could sit here and compare it to Canon and say Canon C-Log has the best color science ever, which most people will agree with, and that's why they go with Canon. The colors is just that much better. But at the end of the day, it's all relative, right? It's all what you want. It's all, what you prefer. But, yeah, man, 2 years with this camera. Couldn't be happier. Super, super good build of a camera. So my light just went out because I'm using NPZ batteries to power it because I don't know where the cord is. So I think it's a sign that I should wrap up. Final remarks, I think this camera, for what it is, just punches so high above its weight class for the time it came out at, for the price point. So I think, if you're considering an ecosystem, don't sleep on Lumix. I think especially with their new S1 Mark II, you pair it with this as a B cam, which I eventually will do. I think a crazy A cam, B cam setup, especially in controlled settings where, you don't have to worry about low light. So yeah, shout out Lumix. You make amazing cameras. We'll see you in the next one. I realize there's a lot to work on. Probably would love to have a top-down camera, looking at the camera close up, showing it. So I don't know how I'm going to do that. It's probably just me rambling right now, which is fine. You guys will get used to it. But yeah, thank you for watching if you made it to the end. If you haven't subscribed, subscribe. And we'll see you in the next one. MRQ out.